Welcome back, it's me, Lou. Today is going to be a toy haul video. So last week, I was on the hunt for this action figure right here. The Batman DC Direct Hush Alfred action figure. I was trying to find this for a decent price online, and I found an eBay seller that was selling them for a super reasonable price. I think it was maybe like $23. And while I was shopping around on eBay, I checked out his eBay store, and he happened to have a bunch of Batman figures that I've been on the hunt for, and they were all for a good decent price. So I decided to pull the trigger on all of them, and we're going to take a look at these figures very briefly. Unfortunately, I'm not sure if I'm going to open some of these figures up yet. Like, initially I had intentions of opening this Alfred, but the box is pretty nice. It's almost pristine, and I might hold off and see if I can find a loose figure for a cheaper price, because I wouldn't mind starting up a small collection of these older figures mint in box. And as you can see, it's a really nice looking piece right here. It looks awesome. Alright, so let's go over some of my purchases and we'll talk a little bit about them. Alright, so first off is this guy. I believe this was a Mattel Bane action figure. I wonder if there's a date on this guy. No, I don't see one. So I want to say this predates the DC Classics DC Universe line that was done by Mattel years ago. It might have, this figure might have been in the solo Batman line, like years ago, back in 2003, 2004, or possibly the DC Superheroes line, which followed the Batman line prior to the DC Classics line. This is something that I've always wanted, and back in the day, I think it went for a pretty penny, but, you know, nowadays with, like, the influx of all these McFarlane figures, and especially with them doing, you know, their versions of, like, all these classic figures, you know, I think the demand for a lot of these older figures, especially the Mattel, I think their prices are kind of dropping down on the secondary market. So this is definitely a figure I've always wanted, and for me to grab them for, I think I got this guy for maybe like 20 bucks or a little bit less than that. It was like a steal. It's a great looking figure, even though it's not up to date with, like, you know, the modern action figures. I still think it's a beautiful piece, and I have a very sizable DC Classics Universe collection, and I really want to add this guy to that. I think in the Classics line, Mattel eventually did a Build-A-Figure, and I think that one's actually pretty expensive. So, and if you're curious about this guy stands in at about, I don't know, 6.5 inches. It's a very cool looking figure, and I'll probably do a solo review on this guy in the near future. But for now, we're just gonna like touch on him briefly. As you can see, really good looking sculpt. There's some ink washing to like really highlight the muscles and the vascularity in his arms. The vest piece is actually separate, so that's kind of neat. He has the venom tube running from his head to his forearm, and some, you know, mild articulation, nothing super crazy. This was very, you know, common for its time, you know, this style of articulation. So yeah, great looking piece. Really glad to add this to my collection. Since we're on the subject of Bane, up next is this guy here. This belongs to the Legends of the Dark Knight, produced by Kenner. And if I had to guess, I'm going to say this guy was probably produced anywhere between 95 and 97. And I'm close. This guy was produced in 1996. It's a slightly stylized version of Bane. I can't remember if this is accurate to any of his appearances in the comic books, or if this is more so like a, you know, like a freestyle design that Kenner came up with themselves. Bane here, he has long hair, which makes him look kind of like almost like heavy metal. He has red venom tubes as opposed to green. There's illustration of Batman in the corner. I want to say that's done by Simon Bisley, or at least an artist who's trying to emulate his style. Back in 1996, this figure was available at Walmart for $7.96. And it's a pretty big figure. If you stand it next to a McFarlane figure, you know, for example, here's the McFarlane designed Batman. You know, it's the same height. So this is what you got back in the day. You know, your dollar would go a long way. And then here he is next to that Mattel Bane that we just showed off a little bit ago. So yeah, this is a cool looking figure. I'm on the fence if I want to open this guy or not. Initially when I bought him, I had full intentions of opening him. But again, the package was super nice, and there is a part of me that wants to build up a mint on card Legends of the Dark Knight collection. I have a handful of figures already mint on card, but not in this style of packaging. It's a very unique take on the character also. Although his mask kind of resembles the luchador mask that like OG Bane had, he comes with this weird accessory that looks like a lobster claw, which I can't really explain. And then there's a nice meaty description of that universe. A little bit of information on Bane also. And then here's some of the other figures in the line. So back then, you know, Kenner gave us so many different versions of Batman. You know, he always had some sort of weird gimmick. It was so hard just to find a plain normal Batman. So here we have Neural Claw Batman, Spline Cape Batman, Assault Gauntlet Batman, Dive Claw Robin, and this is a figure I really want. I remember looking at it back in the day and just kept on thinking, man, I got to add that to my collection, but I just never got around to it. Twister Strike Scarecrow with Scythe Slash. This is such a wicked looking figure. It looks crazy. Just look at that. And keep in mind, these are larger action figures. You're looking at something that's anywhere between 7.5 to 8 inches tall. So these are awesome. What is very interesting too is that Kenner actually called these premium collector series. Because at the time, you know, around this time period, it was like, you know, Batman Forever, Batman and Robin, you know, those Joel Schumacher movies. And the action figures that they produced, you know, for those films, they were like half the size of these figures here. So these larger figures were really aimed much more at collectors, but it's kind of weird because at the same time, I don't think collectors were interested in these weird gimmicks. I think all this kind of stuff here was kind of more so reactionary to this kind of stuff that McFarlane was doing, especially with the larger figures, the more detailed sculpts, you know, and this kind of the way the figures were presented overall. But yeah, I'm kind of stoked to add this to my collection. Like I said, I'm really on the fence about whether or not I want to open them or not. One of the collectible toy stores near me has a handful of these figures mint on card. So I'm kind of divided. I'm not sure if I want to get those other figures and just have like an instant small collection of these, or if I want to take this guy out. Because he does look pretty cool, and he would blend in really well with my Mattel collection of DC Classics. Alright, moving forward, we come to this guy here. We have the DC Direct Batman Hush Alfred action figure. So, during this time period, DC was really riding that wave, or tidal wave, that the comic book series Hush kind of like started. Jeff Loeb and Jim Lee really reinvigorated Batman in the early 2000s. Batman's always been really cool, but that mini-series they did in the Batman books, man, it like really elevated the character to new heights. And, you know, they produced a whole line of action figures based on that mini-series, or that arc in the Batman books. This is the Alfred figure. I'm always on the hunt for like the perfect Alfred figure. And for me, this comes really close to how I envision comic book Alfred. Mattel some years ago made a DC Universe version of Alfred. They had the multiple heads. I think they had the comic book head, and I think they also had the two different live action heads. I can't remember. But it's a but that Mattel piece goes for, I think, a pretty penny right now. So for me, this one, you know, for like $23, you know, why not? It looks pretty cool. And some videos back, you might remember, I reviewed the Huntress figure from this line of action figures. I can't remember how many series were in total. I want to say there were possibly maybe I think 3 or 4 waves. But here's a look at Series 2. There was Stealth Jumper Batman. If you remember the comic book store, I think this is when he goes to when he goes after Ra's al Ghul and Talia, and he jumps from the jet. Of course, here's Alfred. Here's a Commissioner Gordon figure. This is one that I'm kind of on the hunt for. Much like Alfred, it's a character that I really want like the perfect figure of. Some years ago, I got a DC Collectibles version of Jim Gordon, but it's a much younger one where he's kind of like more of a redhead, not necessarily the gray-haired top like this one is here. Ra's al Ghul. Recently, we got the McFarlane version from the Arkham video games, and that's an amazing figure. Again, one of my local collectible toy stores actually has this figure in stock, and I might pick that up if I could get it for a decent price. And then here's a very cool looking Scarecrow. It's very much in line with the comic book. And if you haven't read the Hush story, check them out. They're great. Either get the digital books through Comixology, or better yet, grab yourself like an actual physical trade paperback of volumes 1 and 2, or get the collection in hardcover form. Great story, great looking action figure. Pretty stoked. Again, I'm not sure if I'm going to open this guy or not, and if I do, I'll be sure to cover that in the video. And then lastly, we come to this. So when I was checking out the seller's eBay store, this thing really kind of surprised me because this was an action figure I totally forgot about. This is Series 1 from DC Direct of their All-Star action figures. So during, I think, either the early 2000s or mid-2000s, there was a line of books. They'd grab some of the iconic characters like Batman and Superman, and they'd throw them in these titles like called All-Star. All-Star Batman, it was kind of a short-lived series, and it kind of ended really abruptly. I don't think they ever finished the story. It was written by Frank Miller and illustrated by Jim Lee, I think with inks by Scott Williams, colors possibly by Alex Sinclair, and I think it was lettered by Richard Starkings of Comicraft. The first issue is kind of interesting because I think there were 2 versions. I think an early version of the first print of the comic book of issue number 1, All-Star Batman, I think it had like the word, had like a swear in there, and I think they had to pull it and then like reprint it right away or something crazy like that. But this is a figure from that All-Star Batman number 1, and here's an image that Jim Lee drew. I want to say that's from the cover. And it's a beautiful looking figure, as you can see. Now, I'm kind of divided also on whether or not I want to open this up. Because for one, it's not very posable. If you look this guy up online, just do like a Google image search. And it's a kind of a weird figure because his cape's kind of flowing. And even though he's articulated, he only has this kind of like one pose. And it kind of recreates this pose here where Batman's kind of like walking forward. So it's kind of like one of those things where if I open him up, I'm kind of shooting myself in the foot because it's a cool figure, but it's not very posable. And at the same time, I think the package design is just beautiful. It's very reminiscent of that kind of clam style packaging that we got with like the Spawn action figures of the late 90s and early 2000s. I love this package design because, if you didn't want to open up the action figure, you could leave them perfectly fine in the box, and then you can view them from all the different angles and still get, a good idea of what the figure looked like. And not only that, but just the graphic design that was involved is really eye-catching. I love the image here, the use of fonts, and the color scheme. So this is a really nice piece. If I could find one loose for a cheap price, I'll probably pull the trigger on that. But for now, again, this is much like the other figures I was talking about. There's a part of me that kind of wants to start a small mint on card collection of these guys. And this series isn't very large either. I think they only had like a handful of figures. They had All-Star Superman, which is based off of artist Frank Quitely, or Quitelli. I forgot how to pronounce his name correctly. There's also Super Lois, also from the All-Star Superman book. And then there's Batgirl from All-Star Batman and Robin, which is right there. So yeah, very cool action figure. And here's that Batman I was talking about. You know, once you take him out, you kind of just put him in this one pose. So it's cool though because it's a throwback to like his old school costume, but it's just kind of, you know, presented in a much more modern style, or at least modern for, you know, the early 2000s. So yeah, I'm pretty stoked on all these figures. I kind of want to get more of these. So yes, that's the thing though. So I'm a mint on card collector. I want to say at least 3/4 of the time. I don't know what it is. I think it's part of my mentality from collecting in the 90s. You know, I kind of came up during that time period where some of us always bought 2 of everything. You know, one to open and one to keep mint in box. And I guess it's a weird bad habit I never really broke out of. I know, you know, nowadays the mentality is for a lot of collectors is to take things out of the box. And also, you know, a lot of companies provide you with packaging that allows you to take the figure out without damaging the box, which I think is really, really cool. But for me, I'm kind of like chained to this like period of time. I love this style of box design. You know, the all plastic clamshell. I think it's really cool. And I kind of wish it'd kind of make a comeback, but I don't think it is. Especially with today's companies being very environmentally conscious. You know, like with Hasbro, they're doing the windowless boxes, and other companies are following suit. All right, so let's wrap this video up. Once again, my name is Lou. If you're new to my channel, welcome. If you are a returning viewer subscriber, thank you so much for your continued support. I greatly appreciate it. So until the next video, be safe, take care of yourself, buy lots of toys, and most importantly, be happy. And I'll see you at the next one. All right, later.